Here we are, 1953, probably the most eventful year of our space program so far. We've got quite a bit to cover this year, starting with this first launch of the XSR-3. This is launch D, taking place on January 20th. Just another sounding rocket mission to try and beat 80 kilometers with 75 units of sounding payload from a university. Of course, our mission was a great success, and we followed up by a launch of the X-1. The Kolowa X-1 made its second flight here after that flight late on last year. The primary mission of this flight was to reach 20 kilometers in altitude and reach a speed of 550 meters per second. I knew that the Kolowa unmodified would be able to accomplish this, and so I put it up for flight. Here we are, going higher and higher. You'll note that the engine plume is missing. I think that's an issue with the waterfall mod, part of the RP-1 install, unfortunately. And here we are, successfully reaching the altitude that we wanted to accomplish. And we're coming back down, perfect little glide slope, straight down to the Space Center. We're going to land on the long runway and head on to our next mission shortly. However, you'll note I still do not have any air brakes on this craft. I have decided that I'm going to save them for a future mission where we're going to need them. We're going to be coming in at a bit of a higher speed. I don't want to waste my effort trying to design air brakes that may or may not work. We'll see what happens. You'll note that this flight was piloted by Ernest Hall, once again our daredevil pilot, though he has calmed down a bit since the last year, and we now give to him a lot of the missions that would be considered very dangerous or pushing the boundaries. And I know Stacy is going to be our pilot that will try to prove new aspects of flight hardware and do engineering tests, while Ernest, is going to be our public face of the program. It's going to be the major pilot that does a lot of our flight tests. Here we are coming in for a beautiful landing, but I was running out of runway, so I had to pop the chute once again to put us down, and that was a success. Going into the Ohota 2 Flight A. This is our biological sample version of the Ohota rocket. Its goal is to reach 100 kilometers in altitude and carry 35 units of sounding payload, along with a biological sample. This one is going to be just some mice. We're going up with some small little creatures just to see their reactions to radiation above the atmosphere, and perhaps even some tests on their reaction to zero-G environments. Historically, NASA did this a lot with small monkeys, but here at Aurora Space Program, we have not quite made a rocket big enough to handle those kinds of creatures yet. And so we're just going to do this regular biological sample kit, and that's just going to include some mice or rats, whatever creatures, low mass creatures, that is, we can do. You'll notice something else kind of interesting about this capsule. It's still attached to the avionics core, a large head on top of the rocket with a bit of a trailing bit with a parachute underneath. The point of this was to take advantage of the drag created by the capsule head and have the body orient with the parachute first, knowing that the parachute will be able to take the heat a little bit better than the avionics or the biological sample capsule. This would protect the animals inside from any dangerous re-entry heating and the atmospheric pressures when we're coming back down through the upper and then lower atmospheres. You can see we didn't face too many G's. Here we are coming in to parachute deployment very shortly, passing through the cloud layer approximately 6,000 meters above the surface, and our parachutes deployed 5,000 meters above the surface, heralding the success of the Aotu-2 Flight A. And here we are with some information that we've learned. We're just going to do a little bit of administrative stuff, and we're going to appoint our chief scientist. For that task at the moment, we are going to hire Betty Love, and she is going to be our chief scientist for the first couple of years of the Aurora Space Program. The science also allowed us to unlock supersonic flight, and I believe we got avionics prototypes as well. Those new advances will allow us to lighter weight and more effective later on in the program. And here we are with the first launch of the XSR 4.5 actually, Flight B. We're considering this part of the XSR-4 family in terms of the flight calculations, whether it's Flight A, B, or C going forward. Even though it's got the booster rockets on it, we still have, we want to just consider it to be part of the same family for simplification of procedure and whatnot. So the purpose of this flight was to reach 130 kilometers with a sounding rocket payload for our university once again. And we know that our XSR-3 will not be able to really reach that, and our XASR Era B variants are not able to go far enough or burn for long enough to actually reach those test limits. Here we are on June 22nd. We have Stacy Wood doing a little bit of a hardware test on the X1. We're going to attempt to fly the plane at the maximum possible speed that we can achieve. Well, this seems like a relatively simple test. Believe me, it's got some interesting implications. We want to test the maximum possible speed of the airframe, and we want to do some supersonic cruise science. Stacy Wood's going to monitor his heart rate, his blood pressure, all sorts of things at high altitude supersonic speeds. And this will provide some pretty interesting information for the scientists about G-forces, things they may or may not have known prior to this flight. This sort of feeds into Stacy's character as a diligent worker, I suppose, someone who sticks to the mission at all costs, and something that I kind of like about this character. And I like the dynamic between Stacy and Ernest, even though Ernest is not quite as rambunctious as he was made out to be in the first episode. I still think that I'm going to feed into that a little bit more going forward in the series, just to allow them to have a little bit of a character divergence, something different. As you'll note, in real life, a lot of astronauts and test pilots all had different characters about them and things that they liked to do or things that they felt were important. And that was really exemplified in the early Mercury 7, the first 7 astronauts to fly on NASA's Mercury program. We're still in the test pilot phase of the Aurora Space Program, but it's as good a time as any to actually start characterizing them, even though we'll start probably picking up more pilots going forward once we get to actual crew orbit. But it's still interesting to try to give them a little bit of character, something a little bit different, you know? And here Stacy is coming in for a bit of a quick landing. He's going to probably have to do some S-turns to actually bleed off enough speed to come in on the runway. I know in the past we've had a little bit of trouble with skipping and jumping up and down on the runway when the wheels go over a bit of a bump. And looks like he's not doing any S-turns. I guess we're just going to be coming in for a fast one, so I guess that's that. And I'm sure he'll pull his parachute or something. We'll see. I can't quite remember. Oh yeah, I'm almost certain we almost run out of runway and he has to pull the parachute to get down. Yeah, there we go. And we almost get pulled up again, but we managed to nose down a little bit quickly. Now here we are at the Ahoti 2 Flight B on August 14th. You'll note that the first half of the year was kind of boring. Nothing really happened. But this is another biological capsule. You'll note that this time we wanted to reach 120 or so kilometers, I believe, with a biological capsule and a sounding payload of about 75 units. And of course we did that. Something that we didn't really need to do was to angle over like we did. This is just something that I like to do, so that way the rocket parts, when they come down, aren't flying right back down on the Space Center. And it kind of protects our crew on the ground from any falling missile parts, I guess. And here we are, the core and the biological capsule separated. I'm sure our little rats and mice are doing great in that little tiny capsule there. Of course, the scientists are learning quite a bit about radiation on the upper atmosphere and effects of zero-G environments on those little animals like that. It would be nice to maybe include some plants and stuff to see how their growth is affected in zero-G, but I feel like we don't have quite a long enough mission to justify that quite yet. And here we are. This is going to be the last launch of an unboosted XSR-4. This is Flight C, and we had one that was completed in our stockpile of rockets, and the scientists, they really wanted to test the rocket to see if we adjusted anything, adjusted the way that the rocket worked, how far we could actually get it into the sky. It is a pretty simple sounding rocket, but unfortunately the XLR-10 engine is just not powerful enough to get the XSR-4 up above like 120 or so kilometers, I believe, without boosters on board. And really, we don't have any need of a sounding rocket that can't even break the limits of our XSR-3. And so you see this is a bit of a failure. And here we are on the next flight of a craft here. This is the Cobra X2. This is going to be piloted by Stacy Wood, since this is a very experimental aircraft with multiple working engines. they wanted to give this over to a very seasoned pilot, and unfortunately Ernest did not get to fly this flight. The purpose of the X2 is they include those booster packs underneath the wings, similar to the Quark's XJ1, with the rocket test boosters on them. This is something that we learned from that actual rocket test, and so we're using those little boosters to get us up above around 15 kilometers, and then we drop them off, and we can start angling up at a more gentle angle of attack. This basically it'll save us from the problems that are coupled with the early air launch system. So, right now we have only supersonic flight unlocked, and the earliest level of air launches, and that can cause a lot of problems considering that we don't have access to a better system. And so we use those little underwing boosters to get us up over a certain altitude where our engine can work more efficiently. And on this launch here, we have the XLR-11 with a cruise missile variant. It's a pretty simple-ish engine, but it only has one ignition. So every single time that the X2 comes in from its flight, it will need to be refurbished and have the engine fully pulled out and replaced. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a hassle, and so it costs a little bit of extra money, but this plane was able to reach over 900 meters per second. That is almost a 30% increase on the maximum speed of the X1. So I am very happy with this. In this mission, we completed a contract, which was to reach the altitude of 28 kilometers at 700 meters per second. That's just 2 kilometers below the altitude service limit of our current variant of the X1 cockpit. Here you can see Stacy coming in for a landing. We are eager to test out our new system on board this plane. I'm not sure if I flapped them any before this point, but we have actually finally figured out those air brakes. I have a pretty good mass to strength ratio pulled up, and they are ready for use on any future rocket planes. Here as we come in for a pretty good glide slope, we're losing energy. We're trying to come in for the actual KSC runway instead of the larger X-plane runway. This is kind of a little bit of a flex on our air brake system that we've got. And here we are, almost there. And you can see, there we go. The brakes pop out, and it causes us to have a slight downward angle. And we touch down, and it is a successful landing. Unfortunately, we have a bit of trouble with slippage on the front wheel, and it goes back and forth quite a bit. It's a little scary when that happens, but we managed to keep it under control. Here is the XSR-3 Flight E. This is mostly a altitude test. So we wanted to test the limits of the XSR-3 without its sounding rocket payload. So we removed the sounding rocket payload and reattached the command module. And then we sent it up into the atmosphere. We were actually able to get this one, I believe, above 150 kilometers. So I consider this a bit of a success, even though it had no real purpose other than testing the possibilities of the engines that we currently had. I appear to have misspoken. We only made it up to about 137 kilometers. That's unfortunate. But here we also have a new launch vehicle, one of the new launch vehicles of the year, and that is the Ahote bumper downrange test. So this is a bit of a test. I know that we've not really done this before, but this is our first real two-stage rocket. It's a simple ride using an Ahote with an XSR on top, and the XSR has been the command module has been replaced with a simple cone command module with the minimum possible battery. And here we are, and the XSR launches using some solid rocket motors off the top, and it puts it into a bit of a spin since it's uncontrolled. And here we are moving forward on top of the XASR2 Aero B variant. And even without the electric charge, we just wanted to see the distance that the rocket could get. So we have all of our tracking craft, boats, everybody is out and following the spacecraft as it flies through the outer atmosphere up into space and along the surface of the Earth. At this point, Florida has disappeared beyond the horizon, and we are out into the middle of the Atlantic, reaching approximately 1.3 kilometers. Excuse me, 1.3 thousand kilometers downrange, and I would consider that a bit of a success, even though we had no real objectives with that mission. Here is another sounding rocket contract at 130 kilometers for the XSR-4. You can see we've got the XSR-1 engines strapped to the side, and we continue to use those as we move forward with these XSR launches. The XSR-4 still uses that XLR-10. Here I am getting a bit of a good view of the shock cones that are being created by those rockets. And we drop our boosters, perfect, and we're getting some more data on the XSR or XLR-10. Though this might be the last flight of the XSR-4, we'll see. If we get another 130 kilometers contract, then this sounding rocket might fly one last time next year. And hopefully next year we will see the end of the suborbital suborbital research program, a program that we got from the United States government at the start of the Aurora Space Program, along with our X-plane research. Upon meeting the mission objectives, we blew up the rocket just so that it didn't fall any further downrange. And here we are with the next launch of an Ahote. This is the Ahote 3F variant. This is the Flight A of that variant. And the purpose of this rocket is largely to get some more film samples downrange. As you can see, this time I'm using MechJeb. Historically, I've hand piloted a lot of these, but since you need such precise angles when you're doing downrange contracts, it's difficult to hand pilot them because you don't want to lose control or have your rocket break up. And so you have to do a little bit of pitching with the MechJeb unit. So here I am attempting to flip the camera over so we can get a bit more of a cinematic shot. but unfortunately we did not, and the camera is running. Here's a nice shot though, but yeah. And there I was, making sure that all the characteristics of the parachute are perfectly set, and the deployment altitude is confirmed. And I press the deploy button on the parachute, and it's ready to deploy as soon as it falls back into the atmosphere. Here we can see a quick shot of the Ahote 3 booster falling away from the craft down towards the atmosphere. It's a bit of a fisheye lens, but this is the wide angle camera, and we're using this as our telescope camera to get some good shots of the surface when we're in space. The purpose of these missions is to get shots of the surface, so it's something that the Army would have required, or the Air Force. And here we are getting some screenshots for the title card. Some beautiful shots, I think, of the two crafts floating through space. Throughout this mission, we do kind of get a little bit further than I totally expected that we would, and you'll kind of see that. But right now we're collecting data, doing simple stuff with the probe core and the planetary photography core. So far, this is the most successful mission of any photography mission so far. And here we are. Our mission is about to come down to an end, and we're floating right back down through the atmosphere. Something that I will note is when you're using those cameras from the WholeCam VDS mod, make sure that you don't use them as you're coming down through the atmosphere. Right now it looks pretty okay to me, but sometimes the cameras get really screwed up, and it can be impossible for you to regain a normal view of your craft after that has happened. Here we are getting a little bit of re-entry heating, but luckily not so much. I know that the film canister would not have been able to withstand it if it heated up a little bit more than that. But here we are, descending through the atmosphere gracefully towards our parachute deployment. And coming down, we are at the tail end of our last successful mission of the year. This having flown on, I believe, Christmas Day of December, Christmas Day of 1953, and quite the success. I think it was a really successful year. No failures, which is excellent. The only one that I would consider a failure was actually the unboosted launch of the XSR-4, because it failed to meet the objectives that were set out for it. But the engine performed nominally. It was just not within the power of the craft, I suppose, to reach the set objectives. As you can see here, I am struggling with the camera. That's what I meant. Make sure not to use the WholeCam VDS as you're descending under parachute, at least. And here we are at the end. What an episode this was. All the science that I've earned is now being put to good use. We're putting it into those two new tabs that we're researching: materials science and orbital rocketry. Stuff that's going to be very, very important going forward in this series. I'd like to try and get to orbit by 1956 or 1955 if I can. Ideally 1955, but realistically 1956. And if I want to try and beat those milestones from real life, I have to at least beat October 4th of 1957 for that first orbit. But otherwise, it's been a pretty good success. Here I am mulling over my decisions to select JPL as a contractor. Unfortunately, the main contractor slot, it would have been really nice to have JPL in because of its bonuses. But I don't know. The limits that I'm working under for this series preclude me from picking any of the Soviet divisions. So before you suggest that I grab one of those, I can't grab an OKB division or Ilyushin or anything like that, because I'm limiting myself to only non-Soviet parts and non-Soviet country contractors and stuff like that. I know it's a bit of a stupid limit if I'm trying to actually beat the real life deadlines, but I don't know. I just think it might be fun. I've never actually tried to limit myself that way before. And I know it's really, really easy to get to orbit very early on Soviet tech. So we'll see. Trying to limit. We have a rocket coming up soon. And so here I am picking up that contract for the next rocket that we're going to be flying. I believe it's going to be an an Anhote 3F variant again. And unfortunately, our last mission of the year was going to be the X2 flight again, but I didn't get Ernest trained up in time. 3 days beyond the year, so January 3rd next year is going to be the flight of the X1. It's already ready for the air launch and everything, but I guess I'll leave you all on a cliffhanger. This one's going to try and push the speed limit of the new X1 or the X2 plane. But anyways, I appreciate everybody watching, and something that I like to say is, if you are really enjoying this series, I'd like you to leave a like or even a comment. Just let me know what y'all think of what I'm doing here and what kind of style of speaking you prefer. In the first episodes, I tried to do a bit more of a cinematic voiceover, but I think I struggled with that. It's not in my nature, and I want to try and do a bit more of an informal one going forward. We'll see. At least the cinematic voice acting kind of set the stage for the series and what the stakes are and what the limits are of my program. But I appreciate you all watching, and I hope that you enjoyed. Let me know if you like the series, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye-bye.